There are moments in life when reality cracks open and shows us something impossible. Something that makes us question everything we thought we knew about the world. Emily Rodriguez was about to have one of those moments. It started on a Tuesday morning in March 2024 when she was standing at her kitchen window in Austin, Texas, sipping coffee from a chipped blue mug her grandmother had left her. The morning light was filtering through the old lace curtains, casting shadows that danced across the hardwood floor of her new apartment. That's when she saw him. A blonde boy, maybe 9 years old, standing at the second-floor window of the brick building directly across the street. He was wearing a red sweater that looked too big for his small frame, and in his arms, he clutched what appeared to be a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. The boy lifted his hand and waved at her with the pure, unguarded joy that only children possess. Emily found herself smiling for the first time in months. She waved back. For the next 3 months, this became their sacred ritual. Every single morning at exactly 7:30, he would appear in that window. Sometimes in a blue sweater, sometimes green, occasionally holding different toys, but always with the same gentle smile that seemed to understand her grief without words. These brief moments became the highlight of Emily's days. They made her feel connected to something good in a world that had felt dark and empty since her grandmother's death. She started timing her morning routine around their daily exchange, positioning herself at the kitchen window with anticipation she hadn't felt in years. Emily began to imagine the boy's life. Maybe he was homeschooled. Maybe he had a caring mother who dressed him in those oversized sweaters. Maybe he looked forward to their wave as much as she did. On day 94 of their silent friendship, Emily made a decision that would change everything. She wanted to meet this child who had unknowingly become her anchor. She wanted to thank his family for raising someone so naturally kind. She grabbed her keys, walked down 3 flights of stairs, and crossed the quiet street with a nervous excitement building in her chest. But when Emily reached the other side, her world tilted on its axis. Where the charming 2-story brick building should have been, there was nothing but an empty lot filled with wild grass and weeds. A rusted metal sign reading "Property Available" swayed in the morning breeze, its paint peeling like old skin. Emily's hands began to shake. She walked the perimeter of the lot twice, then 3 times, her mind racing to make sense of what she was seeing. According to every logical explanation, she had been waving at a building that didn't exist. That afternoon, buried in dusty newspaper archives at the Austin Public Library, Emily discovered the truth that would either prove consciousness survives death or confirm that grief had finally shattered her sanity completely. The building had been destroyed 20 years ago in a gas explosion that killed 3 people. Among them was a 9-year-old boy named Jacob Morrison, who died in the exact second-floor bedroom where Emily had been seeing him wave. If you're someone who believes that the impossible sometimes wears the mask of the everyday, then you understand why Emily's hands were trembling as she stared at Jacob's school photograph in that old newspaper. His blonde hair, his gentle smile, his small frame that would fit perfectly in an oversized sweater. It was the same boy who had been waving at her every morning for 3 months from a window that no longer existed. Emily Rodriguez had never believed in signs from the universe until her grandmother died. Abuela Carmen had raised her after Emily's parents were killed in a car accident when she was 7. For 22 years, that small woman with calloused hands and infinite patience had been Emily's entire world. When the cancer took her in February 2024, Emily felt like she was drowning in an ocean of silence. The grief counselor had suggested a fresh start. Sometimes a change of environment can help process loss, Dr. Martinez had said, sliding a box of tissues across her desk. Consider it an investment in your healing. So Emily packed her life into cardboard boxes and moved from San Antonio to Austin, trading her cramped studio for a charming 3rd-floor apartment in a converted Victorian house on Maple Street. The rent was higher than she could comfortably afford on her marketing coordinator salary. But something about the place felt right. The hardwood floors creaked in a comforting way, and afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows that her grandmother would have loved. The apartment came partially furnished with pieces that told stories Emily could only imagine. A worn leather armchair positioned perfectly for reading. A kitchen table made of reclaimed wood that bore the rings of countless coffee mugs. Most importantly, large windows that faced east, filling the space with golden morning light. Emily's new routine was simple. Wake at 7. Make coffee in her grandmother's chipped blue mug, and stand at the kitchen window while the world slowly came alive around her. The street was quiet except for the occasional dog walker or jogger beginning their day. That's when she first noticed the boy. It was March 15th, a Tuesday that started like any other. Emily was stirring honey into her coffee when movement caught her eye in the second-floor window of the brick building across the street. A child appeared at the glass, maybe 9 years old, with blonde hair that caught the morning light like spun gold. He was wearing a red sweater that hung loose on his small frame, and tucked under his left arm was a stuffed rabbit with one ear noticeably shorter than the other. The boy looked directly at Emily's window and raised his right hand in a gentle wave. Without thinking, Emily waved back. The boy's face lit up with a smile so pure and joyful that Emily felt something shift in her chest. For just a moment, the heavy sadness that had been her constant companion lifted like morning fog. Then the boy stepped back from the window and was gone. Emily stood there for several minutes, coffee growing cold in her hands, wondering if she had imagined the entire interaction. But the feeling of lightness remained, as if someone had opened a window in a stuffy room. The next morning, Emily found herself positioning her coffee routine to face the window at 7:30. She told herself she was being ridiculous, that the boy had probably been visiting relatives or staying with friends temporarily. But at exactly 7:30, he appeared again. This time, he wore a blue sweater and held what looked like a small toy car. When he saw Emily at her window, his face broke into that same radiant smile. He waved with both hands this time, bouncing slightly on his feet with excitement. Emily waved back enthusiastically, laughing out loud for the first time since her grandmother's funeral. By the end of the first week, Emily realized she was planning her mornings around their encounter. She would wake up earlier, shower quickly, and have her coffee ready by 7:25 so she wouldn't miss him. The boy never failed to appear, always in different colored sweaters that looked lovingly hand-knitted, always carrying different toys or stuffed animals. Sometimes he would hold up his toys to show them to Emily, pressing them against the glass, like a child might do with a treasured possession they wanted to share. Other times he would wave with such enthusiasm that Emily could practically feel his joy radiating across the space between their buildings. Their silent communication became increasingly elaborate. The boy would wave hello, then point to himself and then to Emily as if to say, "Me and you." Emily would respond by pointing to her heart and then to him, trying to convey her gratitude for these moments of connection. One morning in early April, the boy appeared wearing a yellow sweater and carrying the one-eared rabbit again. But this time, he held the rabbit up to the window and made it wave its little paw at Emily. The gesture was so unexpectedly charming that Emily burst into tears right there in her kitchen. They weren't tears of sadness, though. For the first time since her grandmother's death, Emily was crying tears of pure joy. She realized that this mysterious child had become her anchor. In a world that felt uncertain and lonely, their daily exchange was the one thing she could count on. It didn't matter that they had never spoken, that she didn't know his name or his story. What mattered was that someone, somewhere, was thinking of her first thing in the morning. Someone was choosing to start their day by sharing a moment of happiness with her. Emily began to imagine elaborate stories about the boy's life. Maybe he was homeschooled by a loving parent who knitted those beautiful sweaters. Maybe he had been told about the kind lady in the window across the street. Maybe he looked forward to their waves as much as she did. She wondered if he was an only child, like she had been. She wondered if he had ever lost someone he loved. She wondered if their morning ritual meant as much to him as it did to her. By late April, Emily had been waving to the boy for 6 weeks straight. Not a single morning had passed without their encounter. Even on weekends, even on the rainy days when she could barely see his outline through the droplets on the glass, he was always there at 7:30 sharp. Emily started taking photos of her window view, trying to capture the moment when he appeared, but something about the lighting or the angle always made the images unclear. The boy remained perfectly visible to her naked eye, but somehow elusive to her camera lens. She didn't think much of it. Old buildings and morning light could play tricks with photography. As May arrived and spring settled over Austin, Emily realized she hadn't thought about her grief in days. The boy's daily presence had given her something to anticipate, something to smile about, a reason to get out of bed each morning. Her co-workers commented that she seemed different, lighter somehow. "You're glowing," her friend Jessica said over lunch one Tuesday. "Austin life must be agreeing with you." Emily just smiled and nodded, not sure how to explain that her happiness came from a 60-second interaction with a child she had never met. But as their 3-month anniversary approached, Emily made a decision that would change everything. She wanted to meet this boy who had unknowingly saved her from drowning in grief. She wanted to thank his family for raising someone so naturally kind and giving. On the morning of May 28th, Emily prepared for their usual wave exchange, but this time she had a plan. Instead of just waving goodbye and starting her day, she was going to walk across the street and knock on the door of the brick building. She was going to finally meet the boy in the window. As Emily stood at her kitchen counter that morning, straightening her hair and practicing what she might say to his parents, she had no idea that she was about to discover something that would shatter every assumption she had about reality itself. At 7:30 sharp, the boy appeared in his window wearing a green sweater and holding the one-eared rabbit. He waved at Emily with his usual enthusiasm, bouncing on his feet with joy when she waved back. Emily pressed her hand to her heart and pointed at him. Their established way of saying, "Thank you for being part of my morning." The boy responded by making his rabbit wave its little paw, then pointing to himself and giving Emily a thumbs up, as if to say he was just as grateful for their friendship. Emily took a deep breath, grabbed her keys, and headed for the door. Walking down the 3 flights of creaky stairs, Emily's heart hammered with nervous excitement. She had rehearsed what she might say a dozen times. Something simple and sincere about how much the boy's daily waves had meant to her during a difficult time in her life. She stepped onto Maple Street and looked up at the boy's window. He was still there, rabbit pressed against the glass, watching her with curiosity. Emily waved one more time and pointed across the street, trying to indicate that she was coming to visit. The boy's face lit up with understanding. He waved both hands enthusiastically and disappeared from the window, presumably running to tell his parents that the lady from across the street was coming over. Emily crossed the quiet street, her footsteps echoing against the pavement. The morning air was crisp and filled with the scent of blooming jasmine from a nearby yard. Everything felt perfect, like the universe was aligning to bring 2 kindred spirits together. But when Emily reached the other side of the street, her world tilted completely off its axis. Where the charming 2-story brick building should have been, there was nothing but an empty lot. Emily stopped dead in her tracks, blinking hard, certain her eyes were playing tricks on her. But no matter how many times she blinked, the scene remained the same. Wild grass grew in patches across uneven ground. Weeds pushed through cracks in what appeared to be an old foundation. A rusted metal sign swayed in the morning breeze, its faded letters reading, "Property available, contact Henderson Realty." Emily's hands began to shake uncontrollably. She walked the perimeter of the lot slowly, her mind racing to find some logical explanation. Maybe she had gotten confused about which building it was. Maybe she had been looking at a different window all along. But no. Emily knew with absolute certainty that this was the exact spot. She could see her own apartment window directly across the street, the same distance and angle from which she had been watching the boy for 3 months. A cold sweat broke out across her forehead as the implications hit her. If there was no building, then there was no window. If there was no window, then there was no boy. "Excuse me, miss, are you all right?" Emily spun around to find an elderly man with kind eyes and a concerned expression. He was wearing a barber's apron and holding a steaming cup of coffee. "I'm Marcus Williams," he said gently. "I own the barber shop next door. You look like you've seen a ghost." The irony of his words made Emily's stomach lurch. "This lot," Emily managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happened to the building that was here?" Marcus's expression grew somber. "Oh, honey, there hasn't been a building on this lot for 20 years. Gas explosion back in 2003 killed a whole family. Tragic thing." Emily felt the ground beneath her feet becoming unsteady. "A family? The Morrisons. Nice people. They had a little boy, couldn't have been more than 9 or 10 years old. Sweet kid, always waving at folks from his bedroom window." Marcus paused, studying Emily's pale face. "Are you sure you're okay? You look like you might faint." Emily gripped Marcus's arm to steady herself. "The little boy, what did he look like?" "Oh, blonde hair, small for his age. His aunt used to knit him these sweaters that were always too big for him." Marcus's eyes narrowed with concern. "Miss, why are you asking about Jacob Morrison? That boy died 20 years ago." The name hit Emily like a physical blow. Jacob. The boy she had been waving to was named Jacob Morrison, and he had died in 2003 in the exact location where she was now standing. If you're still with me at this point, it means you're exactly the kind of person who understands that reality is far more mysterious than we've been taught. There's a growing community of us here who recognize that these aren't coincidences or hallucinations. They're glimpses into something far beyond our physical world. Subscribe to this channel because what happens next in Emily's story is going to challenge everything you thought you knew about consciousness, death, and the invisible threads that connect us all across time and space. Trust me. You don't want to miss a single detail of how this impossible encounter unfolds. Emily thanked Marcus and stumbled back across the street in a daze. Her hands were shaking so violently that she could barely fit her key into the lock. She climbed the 3 flights of stairs on unsteady legs and collapsed into the leather armchair by her living room window. From this angle, she could see the empty lot clearly. Patches of dead grass, scattered concrete chunks, the rusted sign creaking in the wind. No building, no window, no boy. But Emily knew what she had seen. For 3 months, she had watched Jacob Morrison wave at her from a window that no longer existed. She had built her entire morning routine around a child who had died before she was even born. The rational part of her mind offered explanations: grief, hallucinations, stress-induced psychosis, a complete mental breakdown brought on by losing her grandmother. But Emily had never felt more clear-headed in her life. That afternoon, she drove to the Austin Public Library and requested access to the newspaper archives from 2003. Her hands still trembling, she searched through months of microfilm until she found what she was looking for. The headline read, "Gas Explosion Claims 3 Lives on Maple Street." Below it was a photograph of the Morrison family. A middle-aged couple with warm smiles and a small blonde boy positioned between them. The boy was wearing a red sweater that looked too big for his frame, and in his arms he held a stuffed rabbit with one ear shorter than the other. Emily stared at Jacob Morrison's school photo for a long time. His gentle smile, his bright eyes, his small hands clutching the same rabbit she had seen him hold up to the window just that morning. According to the article, the explosion had occurred at 7:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in March 2003. Jacob had been getting ready for school when a gas leak in the basement ignited. His parents, Robert and Linda Morrison, died instantly. Jacob's body was found in his second-floor bedroom by the window where he had apparently been trying to signal for help. The same window where Emily had been seeing him wave every morning for 3 months. Emily printed the article and drove home in stunned silence. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, one question echoed in her mind over and over again. If Jacob Morrison had been dead for 20 years, who had been waving at her every morning at 7:30 sharp? And more importantly, what did he want? Emily spent the next 3 days researching everything she could find about the Morrison family and the explosion that claimed their lives. What she discovered made her question not just her sanity, but the very nature of reality itself. The gas leak had been caused by faulty wiring in the basement of the old building. According to fire department records, the explosion occurred at exactly 7:30 a.m. on March 18, 2003, while 9-year-old Jacob Morrison was getting ready for school. His parents, Robert and Linda, were found in the kitchen, apparently killed instantly by the blast, but Jacob's story was different. The fire report stated that Jacob's body was discovered by his bedroom window on the second floor. The glass had been shattered from the inside, and Jacob's small hand showed evidence of desperate scratching against the window frame. Emergency responders theorized that Jacob had survived the initial explosion and tried to signal for help, but smoke inhalation had claimed his life before rescue could arrive. Emily's blood ran cold as she read the details. Jacob had died at his bedroom window trying to get someone's attention, trying to wave for help. The same window where she had been seeing him wave every morning for 3 months. But there was more. Emily discovered that Jacob had been wearing his favorite red sweater the morning he died, a garment his Aunt Patricia had knitted for him just weeks before the accident. In his bedroom, investigators had found his treasured stuffed rabbit, which his aunt later identified as Mr. Hoppy, a toy with one ear that Jacob's baby sister had chewed off when she was teething. Emily stared at the police photographs, her heart pounding. Every detail matched what she had observed: the red sweater, the one-eared rabbit, even Jacob's habit of pressing his toys against the window to show them off. She needed to find Patricia Morrison. A quick internet search revealed that Patricia Morrison, now Patricia Chien after remarrying, worked as a pediatric nurse at Dell Children's Medical Center. According to her LinkedIn profile, she had been employed there for 15 years and specialized in grief counseling for families who had lost children. Emily spent 2 days working up the courage to approach her. How do you tell someone that you've been seeing their dead nephew? How do you explain the impossible without sounding completely insane? On a Thursday afternoon, Emily waited in the hospital parking lot until she saw a woman matching Patricia's description leaving the building. She was in her early 50s with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Excuse me," Emily called out, her voice shaking. "Are you Patricia Chen? Patricia Morrison?" The woman turned, her expression cautious but polite. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" Emily took a deep breath. There was no gentle way to do this. "My name is Emily Rodriguez. I think I've been seeing your nephew Jacob." Patricia's face went completely white. For a moment, Emily thought the woman might collapse right there in the parking lot. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" Patricia whispered. "I know this sounds impossible, but I've been living in an apartment on Maple Street for 3 months. Every morning at 7:30, I see a blonde boy in the window across the street. He waves at me, and I wave back. Yesterday, I tried to visit him and discovered that the building was demolished 20 years ago." Patricia leaned against her car, her breathing shallow. "You're talking about Jacob Morrison, my nephew." "Yes, He wears knitted sweaters that are too big for him, and he carries a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Hoppy. The rabbit's name was Mr. Hoppy. I have photos, Emily said gently, pulling out her phone. I've been taking pictures of my view every morning, and sometimes you can see his silhouette in the window. With trembling hands, Patricia examined the photos on Emily's phone. In several of them, a faint outline of a small figure could be seen in what appeared to be empty air above the vacant lot. This isn't possible, Patricia whispered, but her voice carried no conviction. I know. But I also know what I've been seeing for 3 months, and I think Jacob has been trying to communicate something. Patricia was quiet for a long time, studying the photos with tears streaming down her face. Finally, she looked up at Emily with an expression of desperate hope mixed with terror. I need to tell you something about the morning Jacob died, she said. Something I've never told anyone. Patricia suggested they go to a nearby coffee shop where they could talk privately. Once seated in a quiet corner booth, Patricia wrapped her hands around her mug as if trying to absorb its warmth. I was supposed to spend the night before the explosion, she began, her voice barely audible. Jacob had asked me to stay over because his parents were going out of town early the next morning for a business trip. But I got called in to work for an emergency surgery, and I told him I'd come over first thing in the morning instead. Emily listened intently, sensing that Patricia was about to reveal something crucial. I was supposed to pick him up at 7:15 that morning to take him to school. If I had been there, if I had arrived on time, I would have gotten him out of the house before the explosion. Patricia's voice cracked. Jacob died because I wasn't there when I promised I would be. You couldn't have known what was going to happen, Emily said softly. That's what everyone tells me. But for 20 years, I've carried the guilt of knowing that Jacob spent his last moments alone, trying to signal for help from his bedroom window. The fire report said he was waving his arms, trying to get someone's attention, but it was early in the morning and no one was around to see him. Patricia paused, wiping tears from her eyes. Except maybe now, someone is seeing him. Maybe Jacob has been waiting all this time for someone to notice him, to acknowledge that he was there, trying to get help. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. You think he's been trapped somehow? Unable to move on because he died trying to call for help? I don't know what I think anymore, Patricia admitted, but I know that Jacob was the most loving, generous child I've ever known. If there's any way he could reach out to someone, if there's any way he could let me know he's okay, he would find it. There's something else, Emily said carefully. The way he waves at me, it's not desperate or frightening. It's joyful, like he's genuinely happy to see me. And sometimes he shows me his toys like he wants to share them. Patricia smiled through her tears. That sounds exactly like Jacob. He was always showing off his treasures to anyone who would pay attention. Would you come with me tomorrow morning? Emily asked. Would you come to my apartment and see for yourself? Patricia hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Yes. If there's even the smallest chance that Jacob is trying to communicate, I need to be there. That night, Emily barely slept. She kept thinking about Patricia's story, about Jacob's final moments, about the 20 years of guilt his aunt had been carrying. If Jacob really was appearing to her, if this wasn't some elaborate grief-induced hallucination, then maybe there was a reason. Maybe Jacob had been waiting for someone who would listen, someone who would help him deliver a message he'd been trying to send for 2 decades. At 7:25 the next morning, Patricia knocked on Emily's apartment door. Her face was pale but determined, and her hands shook slightly as Emily led her to the kitchen window. He appears right there, Emily said, pointing to the space above the empty lot where Jacob's window used to be. At exactly 7:30, they stood together in silence, watching the vacant space. 7:28, 7:29. At precisely 7:30 a.m., Jacob Morrison appeared in his window. Patricia gasped and grabbed Emily's arm. "Oh my God! Oh my God! I can see him!" Jacob was wearing a blue sweater today, and he held Mr. Hoppy pressed against the glass. When he saw both women watching him, his face lit up with pure joy. He waved enthusiastically at Emily, then turned his attention to Patricia. For a moment, Jacob simply stared at his aunt with an expression of profound love and recognition. Then he pressed both hands against the window and mouthed words that neither woman could hear but both somehow understood. "I'm okay. It's not your fault. I love you." Patricia collapsed into Emily's arms, sobbing with 20 years of suppressed grief and relief. When she looked up again, Jacob was still there, and he was smiling the most peaceful smile either woman had ever seen. But what happened next would prove that Jacob's appearance was only the beginning of something far more extraordinary than either of them could have imagined. As Patricia and Emily stood transfixed at the kitchen window, watching Jacob's peaceful smile, something unprecedented began to happen. Emily felt a strange, tingling sensation in her temples, followed by a warmth that seemed to spread from her heart outward through her entire body. Suddenly, Jacob's voice filled her mind, not as words, but as pure understanding. Clear, unmistakable communication that bypassed her ears entirely and spoke directly to her consciousness. "Tell Aunt Patricia I've been waiting for her," the voice said, gentle and filled with love. "Tell her I know she blames herself, but she needs to stop. Tell her I'm not trapped here because I'm angry or sad. I'm here because I love her too much to leave while she's still hurting." Emily's eyes widened in shock. "Patricia," she whispered, "he's talking to me. Inside my head. He wants me to tell you something." Patricia turned from the window, her face streaked with tears. "What is he saying?" "He says he's been waiting for you. He knows you blame yourself for not being there that morning, but he wants you to stop. He says he's not trapped here because he's angry or sad. He's here because he loves you too much to leave while you're still in pain." Patricia let out a sob that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. "Jacob, I'm so sorry. I should have been there. I should have protected you." The warmth in Emily's mind intensified, and Jacob's presence became even stronger. "She needs to understand." Jacob's voice continued in Emily's thoughts. "The explosion wasn't anyone's fault. The gas company found a manufacturing defect in the valve that had been there since the building was constructed. Even if Aunt Patricia had been there, she wouldn't have known about the leak until it was too late. She might have died too." Emily relayed Jacob's message word for word. Patricia gripped the window frame, staring at her nephew's gentle face above the empty lot. "How could he know about the gas company investigation?" Patricia whispered. "That information wasn't released until months after the explosion. Because consciousness doesn't end with death," Emily found herself saying, though she wasn't sure where the words came from. "He's been watching over you all these years, Patricia. He's seen your pain, and it's been keeping him tethered to this place." Jacob's presence in Emily's mind shifted, becoming more urgent. "There's more she needs to know," he communicated. "About the morning I died. I wasn't trying to wave for help when they found me at the window. I was waving goodbye." Emily's breath caught in her throat. "Jacob says there's something else you need to understand about that morning. He wasn't waving for help when he died. He was waving goodbye." Patricia's knees buckled, and Emily reached out to steady her. "What do you mean?" The images that flowed into Emily's mind next were so vivid and detailed that she felt like she was experiencing Jacob's memories firsthand. "He knew the explosion was coming," Emily said, her voice filled with awe. "Somehow, he sensed the danger seconds before it happened. He had time to run downstairs and try to wake his parents, but he made a different choice." "What choice?" Patricia asked, though her voice suggested she was afraid to hear the answer. Emily closed her eyes, allowing Jacob's memories to flow through her. He ran to his bedroom window instead. He knew that if he died, you would blame yourself for not being there. So in his last moments, he stood at that window and waved goodbye, trying to send you a message of love instead of fear. The images in Emily's mind became even more specific. Jacob at the window, smoke beginning to fill his room, his small hands pressed against the glass. But his face wasn't panicked or terrified. It was filled with love and determination. He was thinking about you, Emily continued, tears streaming down her face. Even as he was dying, he was thinking about how to protect you from guilt and pain. He wanted his last act to be one of love, not desperation. Patricia was sobbing openly now, but her tears had shifted from grief to something approaching catharsis. "That's exactly what Jacob would do," she whispered. Even as a little boy, he was always trying to take care of everyone else's feelings. Jacob's presence in Emily's mind became gentle and warm again. "Tell her I need her to forgive herself so I can move on," he communicated. "Tell her that carrying this guilt isn't honoring my memory. It's preventing both of us from healing." "Jacob says he needs you to forgive yourself," Emily said softly. "He says that carrying this guilt isn't honoring his memory. It's preventing both of you from healing." Patricia looked up at Jacob's window where his figure still stood clear and peaceful. "I don't know how to let go of 20 years of guilt," she admitted. "You start by accepting that love sometimes means letting go," Emily found herself saying, though again, she wasn't sure if the words were hers or Jacob's. "Jacob's love for you is so strong that he's been willing to stay in this in-between place just to make sure you knew the truth. But his love is also strong enough to trust that you'll be okay without him watching over you." As if in response to Emily's words, Jacob began to glow with a soft, golden light. The light grew brighter and warmer, filling the space around his window with a radiance that seemed to emanate pure love. "He's beautiful," Patricia whispered, her voice filled with wonder instead of sorrow for the first time in 20 years. Jacob raised his hand one final time, not in his usual cheerful wave, but in a gesture of blessing. Emily felt his voice in her mind one last time, clear and joyful. "Tell Aunt Patricia that I'll always love her, but I'm ready to go now. Tell her to live her life fully and know that every moment of happiness she experiences makes me happy too." As Emily relayed the message, Jacob's golden light began to expand, becoming so bright that both women had to shield their eyes. When the light faded, the window was empty. For the first time in 3 months, there was no little boy waving from a window that shouldn't exist. But instead of feeling loss, Emily felt an overwhelming sense of completion. Jacob Morrison had finally delivered the message he'd been trying to send for 20 years. Patricia stood at the window for a long time, staring at the empty space where her nephew had appeared. When she finally turned to Emily, her face looked different, lighter, as if a weight she'd been carrying for 2 decades had finally been lifted. "How is this possible?" Patricia asked. "How were you able to see him and hear him?" Emily shook her head slowly. "I don't know, but I think grief opens us up somehow, makes us more sensitive to things we usually can't perceive. Maybe Jacob chose me because I was in the right emotional state to receive his message." "What happens now?" Patricia asked. Emily looked out at the empty lot, then back at Patricia. For the first time since her grandmother's death, she felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with her own pain. "Now we help other people," she said with quiet certainty. "Jacob showed me that consciousness survives death, that love transcends physical boundaries. There have to be other families out there who need this kind of healing." Patricia's eyes lit up with understanding. "You mean other spirits trying to communicate? Other families carrying guilt and unresolved grief?" "Exactly. What if this gift, whatever it is, isn't just for Jacob and you? What if it's meant to help others find peace?" As they stood together in Emily's kitchen, both women understood that Jacob's appearance had been more than just a supernatural encounter. It had been a calling to bridge the gap between the living and the dead, to bring healing to those trapped by grief on both sides of existence. But neither of them could have predicted how dramatically this newfound purpose would transform not just their own lives, but the lives of countless others in ways that would challenge everything the world believed about death, consciousness, and the eternal power of love. 6 months after Jacob Morrison crossed over into the light, Emily Rodriguez stood in the lobby of what had once been just an empty lot on Maple Street. The Jacob Morrison Memorial Healing Center was unlike any grief counseling facility in the country, and for good reason. Emily had discovered that her encounter with Jacob wasn't an isolated incident. Her ability to communicate with consciousness that had survived physical death was real, measurable, and utterly transformative for families trapped in cycles of unresolved grief. It had started small. Patricia had mentioned Emily's experience to a colleague whose daughter had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. The colleague, desperate for any connection to her lost child, had begged for a meeting. Emily had been reluctant at first, afraid that she was somehow deceiving herself or others about her newfound abilities. But when she sat with the grieving mother and immediately began receiving clear messages from her daughter, messages containing specific details that only the family could verify, Emily realized that Jacob's gift to her was meant to be shared. Word spread quietly through Austin's network of grief counselors, therapists, and support groups. Emily found herself meeting with family after family, each carrying their own burden of unfinished business with loved ones who had died. She helped the father receive a final message from his son who had died by suicide, a message of forgiveness and understanding that freed the man from years of self-blame. She connected a grandmother with her grandson who had died in infancy, allowing both to experience the love that death had seemed to cut short. She facilitated communication between a husband and wife separated by a sudden heart attack, giving them the goodbye they'd never had the chance to share. Each session was different, but they all shared common elements. The spirits who came through Emily were never frightening or demanding. They were always focused on healing, on releasing their loved ones from guilt and pain, on sharing messages of continued love and connection. Patricia had become Emily's partner in every sense of the word. Her medical background and years of experience with grieving families made her the perfect complement to Emily's intuitive abilities. Together, they had developed protocols and safeguards to ensure that their work was ethical, genuine, and truly beneficial for the families they served. The Memorial Center was built on the exact foundation where the Morrison house had once stood. Emily and Patricia had purchased the lot with funds donated by grateful families, and the building itself had been designed as a peaceful space where the living and the dead could safely connect. The main counseling room featured large windows that looked out onto a garden planted with flowers and trees chosen for their symbolic meaning. White roses for remembrance, forget-me-nots for true love and memories, rosemary for remembrance that endures beyond death. On this particular morning, Emily was preparing for what had become her most challenging case yet. The Hendricks family had lost their 16-year-old daughter, Sarah, in a drowning accident at a lake party. For 3 years, the family had been torn apart by blame and recrimination. The parents blamed themselves for allowing Sarah to go to the party. Sarah's younger brother blamed himself for not going with her as their parents had suggested. The family was fracturing under the weight of their collective guilt. Emily sat in the quiet counseling room, centering herself as she had learned to do before each session. The process of opening herself to spirit communication required a delicate balance of receptivity and protection. She had to be open enough to receive messages clearly, but grounded enough to maintain her own sense of self. At exactly 10 a.m., the Hendricks family arrived. David and Margaret Hendricks entered the room with the hollow-eyed look Emily had come to recognize in parents who had lost children. Their son Michael, now 19, followed behind them with the angry, defensive posture of someone who had been forced into therapy against his will. "I still think this is ridiculous," Michael muttered as they took their seats. "Sarah's dead. Talking to some psychic isn't going to bring her back." Emily understood his skepticism. She had been a skeptic herself until Jacob Morrison changed everything she believed about the nature of consciousness and death. "I'm not here to convince you of anything, Michael," Emily said gently. "I'm just here to listen and share whatever comes through, if anything comes through at all." As the family settled into their chairs, Emily felt the familiar tingling sensation that indicated a spirit presence was trying to make contact. But this time, the sensation was accompanied by something new, the sound of laughter. Bright, joyful, teenage laughter that seemed to fill the room with warmth and light. "She's here," Emily said softly, and immediately felt the room's energy shift as Sarah Hendricks made her presence known. Unlike Jacob, who had communicated primarily through thoughts and images, Sarah came through with a personality so vibrant and strong that Emily felt like she was channeling a force of nature. "Tell them I'm not dead," Sarah's voice rang clearly in Emily's mind. "Tell them I'm more alive than I've ever been, and I'm so frustrated watching them destroy themselves over something that was nobody's fault." Emily smiled despite the seriousness of the moment. "Sarah wants you to know that she's not dead. She says she's more alive than she's ever been, and she's frustrated watching you destroy yourselves over something that was nobody's fault." Margaret Hendricks gasped, and David reached for his wife's hand. Michael sat forward in his chair, his skeptical expression wavering. "She's showing me the lake," Emily continued, allowing Sarah's memories to flow through her. The party was at Lake Travis. Sarah went swimming with a group of friends, but they were all laughing and splashing, and no one noticed when she got caught in an underwater current near the dock. Michael's face went white. "We never told anyone about the underwater current. The police mentioned it in their report, but we asked them to keep that detail private." Sarah's presence in Emily's mind became more urgent. "Tell Michael that I don't blame him for not coming with me. Tell him I was glad he stayed home because if he had been there, he might have tried to save me and drowned too. Tell him that his guilt is the only thing about my death that actually makes me sad." As Emily relayed the message, Michael broke down in tears for the first time since his sister's death. "But I should have been there," he sobbed. "I should have protected you." Sarah's response came through Emily with such force and clarity that Emily felt like Sarah was speaking directly through her. "Michael, you were my little brother, not my bodyguard. My death was a freak accident that no one could have prevented or predicted. The only tragedy here is watching my family fall apart when they should be celebrating the 16 amazing years we had together." The session continued for another hour, with Sarah delivering specific messages to each family member. She reminded her parents of private jokes and shared memories that brought smiles through their tears. She told them about the scholarship fund they had established in her name and how proud she was that her death was leading to swimming safety programs that would save other children's lives. Most importantly, Sarah made it clear that she was at peace, surrounded by love, and desperately wanted her family to find peace as well. "I need you all to promise me something," Sarah communicated through Emily. "I need you to forgive yourselves and start living fully again. Every moment you spend trapped in guilt and sadness is a moment you're not honoring the love we shared. I want you to be happy. I want you to laugh and travel and celebrate birthdays and holidays. I want you to talk about me with joy instead of sorrow." By the end of the session, the Hendricks family looked like different people. The hollow despair in their eyes had been replaced by something Emily was always moved to witness: hope mixed with healing. As they prepared to leave, Margaret Hendricks took Emily's hands in hers. "How do we thank you for giving us our daughter back?" she asked through tears. "You thank me by living the life Sarah wants you to live," Emily replied. "You thank me by remembering that love doesn't end with death. It just changes form." After the family left, Emily sat alone in the counseling room, overwhelmed by gratitude for the path her life had taken. Her own grief over her grandmother's death had opened a door to healing that she never could have imagined. Patricia entered the room carrying 2 cups of tea and settled into the chair beside Emily. "Another successful reunion," Patricia observed with a smile. "I still can't believe this is my life," Emily said, shaking her head in wonder. "6 months ago, I was just a grieving marketing coordinator who moved to Austin to start over. Now I'm somehow helping families communicate with their deceased loved ones." "Do you ever miss your old life?" Patricia asked. Emily considered the question seriously. Her work at the Memorial Center was emotionally demanding and often exhausting. She dealt with profound grief and trauma on a daily basis. There were sessions that left her drained and sessions where no spirit contact occurred at all, leaving families disappointed despite her best efforts. But there were also moments like today, when she witnessed the exact instant that a family's despair transformed into hope. When she saw parents realize that their child's consciousness had survived death and was still connected to them through love. When she watched siblings forgive themselves for perceived failures and guilt they'd carried for years. "No," Emily said finally, "I don't miss my old life at all. This work, this calling, it's what I was meant to do. Jacob didn't just give me the ability to communicate with spirits, he gave me a purpose that feels bigger than anything I could have imagined for myself." Patricia smiled and raised her teacup in a gentle toast. "To Jacob Morrison, who taught us that love really is stronger than death." Emily clinked her cup against Patricia's. "And to all the spirits who trust us to carry their messages of love back to the people they left behind." As the sun set over Austin that evening, Emily stood at the window of her apartment on Maple Street, looking down at the Memorial Center where a small bronze plaque marked the spot where Jacob Morrison had once waved from his bedroom window. The plaque read, "In memory of Jacob Morrison, and all souls who love so deeply that death cannot silence their voices. May their messages of healing continue to bridge the space between worlds." Emily no longer waved at the empty space where Jacob's window used to be. She didn't need to. Jacob had crossed over into the light, his message delivered, his aunt healed, his purpose fulfilled. But sometimes, just as the sun was setting and the light was hitting the Memorial Center just right, Emily could swear she saw a small figure in one of the center's windows, waving not goodbye, but hello to all the spirits and families who were just beginning their own journeys toward healing. The boy in the window had become something much more powerful than a ghost story. He had become proof that consciousness survives death, that love transcends physical boundaries, and that sometimes the most impossible things are actually the most true. 5 years have passed since Emily Rodriguez first saw Jacob Morrison waving from a window that shouldn't exist. Today, she stands in front of the United Nations General Assembly, preparing to address world leaders about the documented reality of consciousness survival after death. The Jacob Morrison Research Foundation has grown into an international organization with centers in 12 countries. Emily's abilities have been studied and verified by neuroscientists, physicists, and consciousness researchers from Harvard, Stanford, and the Institute of Noetic Sciences. What began as one woman's impossible encounter with a deceased child has evolved into a scientific revolution that is fundamentally changing humanity's understanding of life, death, and the nature of consciousness itself. The research data is undeniable. Under controlled laboratory conditions, Emily has facilitated communication between hundreds of families and their deceased loved ones, providing specific information that she could not possibly have known through any conventional means. Brain scans taken during her sessions show unprecedented patterns of neural activity that suggest she is indeed accessing information from sources beyond the physical world. But more importantly, the healing that results from these communications has transformed thousands of lives. Families trapped in decades of guilt and unresolved grief have found peace. Suicide rates among bereaved parents in cities with Morrison centers have dropped by 40%. The fear of death itself is beginning to dissolve as more and more people witness evidence that consciousness continues beyond physical existence. As Emily steps up to the podium, she thinks about Jacob Morrison, the little boy whose love was so strong that death couldn't silence his message. She thinks about Patricia, who has become not just her partner in this work, but her dearest friend and chosen family. She thinks about her grandmother, whose death opened Emily's heart to grief so profound that it created a bridge between worlds. Members of the United Nations, Emily begins, her voice clear and strong. I stand before you today to share evidence that will fundamentally change how our species understands the nature of existence itself. 5 years ago, I was a skeptical marketing coordinator who thought death was the end of everything. Today, I am here to tell you that consciousness survives physical death, that love transcends the boundaries between worlds, and that the spirits of our deceased loved ones are not gone. They are simply living in a different form, connected to us through bonds that cannot be broken by anything as temporary as death. The assembly hall is completely silent, hundreds of world leaders listening with rapt attention to words that would have been dismissed as fantasy just decades ago. The boy in the window taught me that miracles aren't supernatural anomalies. They are natural expressions of a reality far more vast and mysterious than we had previously understood. They are proof that the universe operates on principles of love, connection, and consciousness that extend far beyond what we can see with our physical eyes. Emily pauses, feeling the weight of the moment, the magnitude of how far she has traveled from that morning when she first saw Jacob waving from his impossible window. Today, I invite all of humanity to step into a new understanding of what it means to be alive, what it means to love, and what it means to say goodbye. Because the truth is, we never really say goodbye to those we love. We just learn new ways to say hello. As applause fills the assembly hall, Emily closes her eyes and sends a silent message of gratitude to Jacob Morrison, wherever his consciousness now resides. His 3 months of patient waving from a window that existed only in the space between worlds had sparked a global awakening that would change humanity forever. The boy in the window had kept his promise. He had delivered his message of love, healing, and hope not just to his Aunt Patricia, but to the entire world. If you're still with me after this impossible journey, it means you're someone who understands that reality is far more magical and meaningful than we've been taught to believe. Emily Rodriguez's story reminds us that sometimes our greatest gifts come disguised as our deepest pain. Her grandmother's death, which felt like the end of everything, actually opened the door to her true purpose. The grief that nearly broke her became the bridge that allowed her to heal thousands of other families. Jacob Morrison's story shows us that love really is stronger than death. A 9-year-old boy's determination to heal his aunt's guilt was so powerful that it transcended the boundaries between worlds and sparked a global transformation in how we understand consciousness and existence. Patricia Morrison's story proves that it's never too late to forgive ourselves and step into healing. 20 years of guilt dissolved in a single moment when she finally understood that love means letting go. But perhaps most importantly, this story reminds us that we are all connected by invisible threads of consciousness, love, and spiritual energy that death cannot sever. The people we've lost are not gone. They are simply loving us from a different place, waiting for us to open our hearts wide enough to feel their continued presence in our lives. What impossible thing are you ready to believe? What miracle are you prepared to manifest in 2025? What message of love is the universe trying to send you through the synchronicities, the dreams, the quiet moments when you feel your departed loved ones close by? Your story of transformation may be waiting just on the other side of something that seems too impossible to be real. But as Emily Rodriguez learned when she first saw a boy waving from a window that shouldn't exist, the most impossible things are often the most true. Keep your heart open. Keep your eyes watching for miracles, and remember that love never dies. It just finds new ways to wave hello.